Well, it's Sunday. I'm a bit scruffy, a little tired. Worked a lot yesterday, and I have the house to myself, so that's been fun. And as a consequence, I've been taking lots of client calls and doing some music and working out and cleaning the house and doing some things around the house, which is cool. Hey, Chris. Man, nice to see you. And so as I've been taking some client calls, I'll probably take more tonight. And I've been on the carnivore diet a little bit this week, and we're packing up the house to move pretty soon, and we're not moving very far. Not moving outside of Calgary. We're moving just 7 minutes down the road to get our own place, which is going to be nice. It's going to be a cool change. I see advantages. I also see disadvantages to losing my studio, but that's okay. We'll build another one down the road. Anyway, so I'm popping on here today because a lot of people in this group I know certainly have had an experience of trauma. Fine. And you all, if you have followed me long enough, you'll know that I have my own stance on what that means and all that stuff. Because I come from, and some people might say I'm in my head or I'm just too logical or whatever. And look, I don't want to come off here and be like I'm a trauma specialist, because I'm not. It's not something I really care to work with. I'm very much more interested in helping people understand their innate currency styles so that they can understand how they transact with people in the world, so they can show up in their businesses and show up in their life and show up in their relationships in a way where they are actually getting what they want and giving what they want in exchange fairly, so that they're not running into fuck-ups. I love doing that for people, but every once in a while, you got to deal with some stuff. And now, my perspective is kind of starts like this. Number one, everyone has some kind of trauma. Okay? So I don't want to go in and start, debating who's got the most trauma here, or who's, like, this isn't the trauma Olympics. Does that make sense? Everyone has something. Everyone's version of something is just as bad enough for them to drive them crazy. Does that make sense? So, from that perspective, there's always someone who has it worse. That's my point, is that there's always a worse trauma. It doesn't make yours bad, and it doesn't make yours minimized, and I'm not incentivizing you to do that. But I am simply clarifying that my position on this is that there's always a worse trauma. So we're not going to play whose is worse. That being said, there are other teachers in the world who philosophize the idea that, the past doesn't matter and it doesn't concern you and you should never look there. Or why the hell would you ever go back on your past, kind of thing. It's done already, blah, blah, blah. Isn't that so easy? Well, no, it's not. See, Stoicism, I was in a Stoicism philosophy group the other week, and hey cat, I'm trying to train the cat to be an indoor cat. I was in a Stoicism philosophy group the other week, and they're talking about how, the past doesn't impact me anymore. It's over and done with. Why the hell should it impact me? Well, that doesn't really work either, because the thing is that the past does impact you because it's stored in your body. It's stored in your physiology. So when you have a trauma response to something in your life, and you haven't, not saying that you should, but let's say you haven't worked it out, or gotten rid of that chemical reaction, which is literally a biological feedback in your mind, well, then it's going to keep happening. And so now you have this biological imprint in your mind, which is producing a specific type of chemistry, which is constantly going on because you never consciously diluted or deleted the threat level. And therefore, you keep feeling that way. And as you keep feeling that way, of course, what happens is that you start thinking in certain ways that help you feel that way. And so therefore, feeling and thinking all in this one direction, and suddenly you're in a nightmare. And so that's where my client was yesterday. I had an awesome opportunity yesterday to work with a client who I've worked with for well over a decade at this point. Not saying that they're just working on the same problem. They're not. But this problem in particular was really running them. And over the past few months, I've helped them engage in a bit of an adventure in their life where they have been on their own for the first time in their life, and they've done things on their own the first time in their life, and they're like traveling to different cities, just trying to be on themselves. And she's gone through all sorts of experiences that have helped her confront and wake up deep emotional fears and things that she was not willing to embrace when she was sitting at home in her hot tub. So we've had a cool experience the last few months, and the thing that came up yesterday was incredible, because I ended up like saying, we had a bit of a relationship shift, and I was like, look, I really want to work with you, but we're going to go high grade. So I, charged her an amazing amount of money to work with me, and she accepted. And so we started doing it. Now, why is that important? Because it was after I invoiced her. This is amazing. It's the most amazing thing to me. When I invoiced her what I invoiced her for my services as my help, it was amazing, because the next day she poured out onto me her entire life story, which she had never told me in the 10 years previous. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? I thought this person was like relatively normal, didn't have that much pain or whatever. But Nancy's telling me about like situations that she had as a teenager that would horrify anybody. It would horrific, like full on. So I'm like, how the hell did I miss this? Like, did this just never come up? But this is part of the thing of people and what they're willing to commit to. I don't want to make this a commitment video. I don't want to make this, you should pay amazing amounts of money for therapy video. That's not exactly what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it's very interesting how much you as a person might be willing to reveal to a person who might be able to help you when you have something to lose. It's astonishing. I couldn't believe what happened. And one of these things happened yesterday. It finally finally came up. My client's trauma, I'll just share this. I'm not going to share her name. You have no idea who she is. So we're safe on that level. But my client's trauma was her first sexual experience. Now, that might relate to you, it might not. You might have a great first time, whatever. Fine. I kind of did. Not necessarily, I'll just be honest. But we all have some kind of experience there. Okay, so whether it's good or bad, you be the judge of that for yourself. But my client had a very interesting experience where she was with a guy who intentionally broke the condom and intentionally tried to get her pregnant. And while doing so is facing her and is saying things like, you're going to be famous one day. You're going to be famous. You're going to be famous. Just let this happen. You're going to be famous. What? Like, and I'm thinking like, what the hell is going on through the mind of a guy who's intentionally wanting to do this? And I'm realizing, like, this guy's pathological, man. Like, he's crazy. Like, he's like, you're going to be famous when you have my offspring, basically. Okay. That isn't a red flag for some perverse form of narcissism. I don't know what it is. But anyway, that's what her experience was. So she's trying. So she's like, in her own words, she's telling to me, this is the most traumatic experience in my life. I can't believe that a guy would do that. I can't believe there are men in the world that do that. I lost trust. I can't believe I put myself in that experience. I can't believe that happened to me. Blah, 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 blah. And I listened to all these beliefs that she had, because it's beliefs. So here's the thing, another philosophy of mine that might be useful to you if you so adapt this. Just consider it. Consider the idea that trauma doesn't actually exist. And before you yell at me for a second, just hear me out. Is it trauma that exists, or is it an expectation that trauma shouldn't have been there or should have been different? This is a very interesting concept. So you might choose to adopt this in your life and just think about it. Like, what exactly about your experience makes it traumatic? Is it the experience, or is it the expectation and the belief that you are putting onto the experience that it should somehow be different or not have happened or should have gone some other way? So she's telling me this. She's like, I can't believe I put myself in this situation. Great. So she set up beliefs here. So here's what happens in trauma. You set up beliefs. In your experience of trauma, what happens is that you set up interpretations and you set up beliefs that you then say are true about yourself and other people, which, because there's an emotion behind it, you believe vigorously. And therefore, it's very hard to break those beliefs until you have a lot of evidence otherwise. And so I'm listening to my client talk about this. Her first sexual trauma, guy intentionally breaks the condom to try and impregnate her and create offspring for his own domain, kingdom of pathology, I guess. Turns out that a few weeks after that, he hired an escort and impregnated her, and they had a baby. So that's an interesting place. So I mean, that was kind of happening anyway. Like, the point here is that, like, a baby coming out of this person was happening. This is happening because it happened in reality. And so my client is dealing with this, and it comes up. And why is it coming up for her? Because every single relationship she has ever had since, every interaction she has with a man, every time she has a date, gets on a call with a guy, meets someone new, goes for a walk with a man, in any way that might be some level of intimacy, or just meeting someone, she has anxiety. She comes up, she can't get rid of it. She's like, I'm always anxious around men. Always anxious around men. I guess, yeah, can you see that there's a correlation there? Like, I know there's two people, probably Michelle and Chris, watching. Like, can you see that there's a correlation there, that if you have this experience in life, early on in your life, that, like, you then believe that men aren't trustworthy, and that men can hurt you, and that you are vulnerable, and you don't know exactly what got you in that situation, so you don't trust yourself? Can you see that's going to lead up in your future to unconscious decision making about relating with other people, especially men? And I'm not saying that that's wrong to do, but I'm just saying that that's a consequence. Okay? So, now, is that a traumatic experience? Yes or no? Here's a question for you guys. Is that a traumatic experience? Is a guy intentionally breaking the condom a traumatic experience? I mean, I know it depends on who's viewing it, right? We can't just all say that, stubbing my toe on a rock outside is traumatic. Does that make sense? But would anyone agree that might be a traumatic experience? But why? Why exactly? Does that make sense? It's like, why? Well, why is it a traumatic experience? Okay, a guy breaks a condom and, I guess you could say, violates trust. I guess you could say, there's all sorts of things that are in there. My clients shared them with me. But every one of her complaints about that experience, which made it traumatic, was built upon an expectation. Hey, Alex just sold a client for $5,000 a month. It's amazing. I love that. My client, the reason this thing was traumatic for her was because she had expectations, because it's something unwanted that happened to you. Correct. Which means there's something else that you have wanted to have happen to you in that experience. Every trauma in your actual real experience of life, okay, in your perception of your reality, every trauma you have, everything that you are perceiving as being traumatic, comes with an expectation that it shouldn't have happened, an expectation that since it did happen, it should have went this way, comes with an expectation of people shouldn't be that way. They should only be this way. And so therefore we set up these one-sided beliefs and idealisms about how life is supposed to be. And so long as that expectation is kept alive by reinforcement and by you persisting that that should be the way it is, that's how life should be, your trauma will never resolve itself. Because when your beliefs about reality conflict with reality, reality always wins. Okay? Now, what does that mean? So my client says, well, of course it was traumatic. I said, why? Why is that traumatic? Well, because, kind of like Chris said, I didn't ask for it. I said, okay, so do you have a positioning here that says you should have asked for it then? She's like, well, he should have known that it's not something I wanted. I'm like, so you are having a fantasy that he should have read your mind? She's like, no, he just should have been a nice person. I'm like, great. So can you see that you now have positioned a belief that men should be nice, but you have a real belief that men are not very nice sometimes? She's like, yeah, I could see that. Okay, great. So what would have been the drawbacks to you in your life if that person had been nice to you at that time? And she goes into a blankness because no one ever asks these questions. I'm a very privileged person. I'm a privileged person. I'm a privileged man because at a point in my life, I shared this story on my webinar a few times. There's a point in my life where I attempted suicide. And that same evening, my father, by random, brought me a mentor that changed my life. And that mentor taught me to ask better questions because he helped me understand that the quality of your life is based upon the quality of questions that you are asking yourself. And also the quality of answers which you're willing to give yourself. And I would also maybe add one more into it. It's the quality of mentors and the quality of people and guides that you have around your life. And I'm very privileged that way because I have a lot of them. I have a lot of questions, I have a lot of answers, I have a lot of people. And so I am totally willing to challenge the fuck out of myself to help me grow and figure out me as a person and figure out myself, that kind of thing. So I'm like, I asked my question. I said, what would be the drawback of this person who intentionally broke the condom to attempt to impregnate you? What would have been the drawbacks if this person had been nice and instead not broke the condom or had done what any normal person would probably have done in that moment? She never thought about it. She never thought about this question. So I said, okay, well, let's look the other side then. What's the benefit of that happening the way it did? What's the benefit of him breaking the condom intentionally inside of you? She says, well, I learned not to trust men. I said, how has that benefited you in your life? And she goes into a blankness again because she's never gone past this moment. I realized yesterday that my client of 10 years, for whatever reason, never brought this up. And I was never able to bring her past this point in her consciousness. And what's interesting about it is super cool, just as an extra piece, is that her communication with men, the second a man is interested in her, or she gets a relationship, or starts something, her communication goes back to when she was like 15. Exactly when this happened. So and this is something I learned from my mentor, is that your level of consciousness, your level of emotional development, your level of interpersonal, relational, transactional relations, literally is stuck at the age of your trauma. You can't move past it consciously in whatever area of life that is. So in her area of life, relationships, she's always talking like a kid. She sent me these screenshots of her messages between herself and this new guy that she's been pursuing, who she pursued. She moved cities to pursue, and he ended up just wanting a one-night stand. So it's like another betrayal, another I can't trust man, another one of these things that she's drawing into her life to remind her of this experience, because life will do that. Life demands that you grow. Life demands that you honor reality. Life demands that you give up chasing a fantasy and you just have gratitude or have some level of appreciation and resourcefulness in the experience of what is. So she's like remanifesting this experience again and again and again and again and again. And she sends me her screenshots of her communication, and I'm like, you are so like, as a man, I would be completely turned off by this because it's like dating a kid, and it's like weird. It feels fucked, you know. So, but that's where she was in her mind because she can't get past it. Anyway, so what did we do? What did we do? How did we get past this? Number one, I said, why is this even traumatic? That's the first thing you want to ask yourself if you're interested in this thing. You ask yourself, what about this exactly is traumatic? So Chris, as an example, says, because it's something unwanted that happened to you. Great. But so are other things. Like, I have to pay taxes. Do I want to do that? No. But does that make taxes traumatic? I have to work to make money. Do I want to? Sometimes. Of course, sometimes. I have to breathe. Here's another example. I do have to breathe. Like, I don't really want to breathe all the time. Actually, breathing inside of a float tank when you're trying to relax is really fucking annoying. But I have to, because if I don't, I'm going to die. So does that make breathing traumatic? I have to drink water. I don't really want to all the time, but I have to. Does that make drinking water traumatic? I don't have to, but I do cut my hair. I have to cut my hair sometimes. Or what's some other things that we have to do that we might not want to do, right? I know that for me to get from here to the coast of Albania, as an example, to go and stay at a resort, I'm going to need to spend money, and I'm going to need to travel on a plane or a boat, and it's going to take a while, and I'm going to take time off of work and like lose money and all sorts of things. Do I want to do any of those things? No, I just want to go and have an experience and vacation. There's certain things that I don't want to do in the pursuit of that. Does that make the vacation traumatic? And this is the thing, is it's very difficult for us people to justify when we take it down enough and we go enough down the thread of thought. It's very difficult. I did this with my wife the other day where she's like telling me something and I'm like, let's go all the way. Let's go all the way. We go all the way down the thought and it's like wasn't traumatic at all. So it's very few things that are actually traumatic, and I'm actually going to argue potentially that there's probably nothing that is. What is traumatic is our own expectations that we re-traumatize ourselves with by thinking that it should be another way. We can have traumatic expectations. We can have traumatic fantasies. We can have traumatic idealisms and judgments and concepts about how life should be, which oppose the way it was. And that's not to diminish whatever you're experiencing, but I'm just saying that this is one of the most effective ways to clear trauma, because all I did with my client, I'm like, great, so what's the benefit of that experience happening to you? What's the benefit of him intentionally trying to get you pregnant? And she's like, well, I learned to not trust men. I said, well, what else? She's like, well, I became very non-sexual as a teenager in high school, and that probably saved me from a lot of grief and aggravation. I'm like, great. So can you see that experience caused you or got you to be a lot more careful with men? She's like, totally. I'm like, have you been in relationships with other men who definitely wanted to take advantage of your biological abilities? She's like, yes. And they turned me off. I'm like, great. So can you see that this set you on a path of maybe not wanting to have a kid with maybe not the wrong person? She's like, totally. I'm very careful about that. I'm like, great. So what else? What's the benefit of you not trusting men? She's like, well, I'm very careful with the people who I work with in business, because she's a business person. She works with a lot of men. And most men are trying to, get in her pants or whatever, because she's a sexy person. Fine. and she's like, I'm always getting this unwanted attention. I'm always getting this sexual attention I don't really want, and so I have to keep my guard up all the time. And that kind of feels like that. I'm like, okay, great, but let me back this up a second. And I said, isn't it possible that your resistance to this experience in your life, okay? What was I saying? Right, okay. Okay. In her experience with men, she's attracting the same thing all the time. Unwanted sexual energy, unwanted sexual attention. I learned from a mentor that that's actually a consequence of wanting health and healing. Attention. We want attention. Okay? So she's getting unwanted attention. Well, can you see, though, that she's gone through an experience that she didn't want? So I don't want that unwanted attention. I don't want that want of attention. I don't want that style of attention. So I don't want unwanted attention, but that's the one thing she breathes in her life the most of. And it's the one thing that she uses her Instagram to go and promote, is unwanted attention. And so I asked her this question too. This is a cool one. Check this out. I said, when have you intentionally tried to impregnate someone? And she's like, what? And she gets all dark on me and evil. And she's like, you bastard asshole. Who the hell, how the hell do you ask a question like that? And I'm like, well, let's just think about it. Who have you intentionally tried to impregnate? She's like, no one. That's sick. It's gross. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hang on for a second. Let's go down the thread. Let's go to the bottom. And I found out that actually she breaks the condom every time she posts on Instagram. Because now she's breaking the condom of my conscious protection of my life by going through my phone via my choice to go and look at her thing. And now I'm face to face with her sexy images that she posts all the time. Which means now I'm having to think about that, which was unwanted attention, but it's now on my feed, so it's kind of random. It's gambling. Social media is gambling, basically. And now she's broken the condom, and I'm impregnated with this vision, which now I get to judge my life comparison to and everything else. So, also with music. She's like, oh my God, I guess that's kind of true. I am intentionally trying to impregnate people with my music. I'm like, right. Isn't that interesting? She's like, holy shit. And she runs a health business too. And I said, well, isn't it possible that you're trying to impregnate people with a mineral or some kind of thing that's going to help them be healthy? Because don't you want that for them? You want them to... She's like, holy fuck. I'm like, yeah, can you see that you are intentionally trying to impregnate people, not with a baby necessarily, but with something? She's like, yeah, I can see that. I said, great. So that being said, now why would I do that? Why would anyone want to do that? Because if you perceive that your so-called traumatizer has more traits than you or has more power than you, then you will not win this game. Okay? The real game here is, how can I see that I have the same qualities as that person? Because now I'm not below and I'm not above. I'm not judging them. I'm not judging myself and judging them, or judging them and judging myself. I can see them as a person. I can humanize this a little bit. Now, that might be useful to you, maybe not, but it is for me. And I took my client, and then when she looked at the benefits of it, I said, so what would be the drawbacks if this person had been nice to you and had not done this and had not intentionally broken the condom and had actually treated you well and did all the right things? She's like, well, I probably would have kept fucking the guy. I probably would have been in a relationship with him and probably would have got pregnant anyway. I'm like, right. And so if that had happened, what would happen in your life? She's like, oh my God, I probably have a kid right now. We're living in a trailer. I said, what else? What else? What else? We kept going. Found out that pretty much everything in her life would be completely screwed up had that person not intentionally broken the condom to give her an experience where she couldn't trust a man and then shut down and then lived most of her life in a certain way, where she had a high value on business, high value on artistry, high value on promoting herself, high value on building a following, doing this, doing that, whatever. All these things which are more or less entrepreneurial, which she wouldn't have had unless that experience had gone through. And if it had gone her the opposite, where her fantasy would have been happening, the reality is her life would have been destroyed. She would have been a teenage mom with a kid at 16. Married to or with a guy who probably was going to leave, right? So now she's dealing with a single kid, right? And her family dynamic has been always intense and pretty crazy. So, like, she wasn't going to get a lot of love from that. So she's like, holy shit, my whole family dynamic would have been screwed up. I'm like, yeah, what else? Oh my God. I wouldn't have no time to work with my dad and grow his business, and we wouldn't be moving to some country that she's moving to right now, and we wouldn't be doing well as a family. Oh my God, we wouldn't be. I'm like, can you see that this person, by doing this action, directly or indirectly, for whatever fucking reason, benefited you because it helped you get closer to your family, and now you guys are building a dynasty where you have real estate portfolios all over the world, and you're working and you're killing it in business. Can you see that all of this would have been impacted had he had done the thing that you said you wanted him to do? She's like, yeah. I said, did you ever take the time? This is a really fucked up question, by the way. I said, have you ever taken the time to thank this person for doing that, to make sure that you didn't go down that road? Because you were going to. She's like, I was totally going to do that. I was a rebel kid, man. I wanted all that stuff. I wanted, like, the drugs. I wanted this. I wanted that whole scene. And I said, can you see that when that happened, it woke you up? And you didn't do that anymore. She was like, yeah, I straightened out. And now I'm like a millionaire. And, like, I'm kicking ass in life. And, like, all these other things. And so I'm like, isn't it possible that when you are attempting, again, to relive these childhood fantasies in your relationships, that you're going to have anxiety? She's like, what do you mean? I said, can you see that you going after another person who looks like this, has tattoos, does drugs, blah, 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 the bad boy, right? Can you see that every time you do that, you're going to have anxiety because you're prepped that way? She's like, right. I said, do you think that's maybe your brain just telling you that these people are not your quality? And that's when we cracked it. Because what happens here is this is a really cool piece, and this is like my favorite piece about working with people's painful experiences and stuff like that. This is my favorite thing. I'm just gonna go check my breakfast. This is my favorite part of this whole thing. Okay. That is done. Have a good breakfast. All right, here's my favorite part. The favorite part about this whole thing for me is when I helped my client dissolve her attachment to her traumatized expectation of how life should have been, and helped her recognize the value of what happened. Her physiology dropped the stress. And she went through this experience. I'm on the phone with her, and she's telling me, she's like, oh my God, I'm changing. There's something's happening right now. Literally, her entire body shifted. Her feelings shifted. Her mentality shifted. And her voice changed in the period of about 5 minutes. And then she started, like, for my conversations with this person, like, it's like, Stephen, what do I do? What do I do, Stephen? How do I deal with this, Stephen? It's like I'm getting calls from this person all the time. It's like, just please tell me how to live my life. Make all the decisions for me. And I'm like, this is not the point. And yesterday was the first time in 10 years where she explicitly said, here's what I'm going to do. And I believed her. I believed her because she was certain. Because she had her identity back. She had her life back after doing this kind of experience. Why does that happen? This is my favorite part. When you associate your identity to reality, you have no choice but to find the value in that experience. When you associate your identity to a fantasy or an expectation of how life is supposed to be, that you've set up for yourself in your own mind, that doesn't really exist but is only in your imagination, well, then you don't ever have to take accountability for the value of that, do you? Because it's imaginary. And so therefore, if you're always stuck in an imagination and you can't associate to reality, when does growth occur? Because growth happens in reality, not your fantasies. So the whole time, she's been stuck as a 15-year-old kid in an adult body in this particular area of her life, relationships and sexuality. And we cleared this out because we just associated her to reality again and killed the fantasy. The fantasy wouldn't be better. I'm like, if you could have that experience again, would you do it any differently? She's like, I'm not sure I would. I'm like, okay, so are you saying that if you were to go through that experience again, that you would absolutely go for it because of what you got out of it? She's like, yeah, that's not wrong. How have I been judging this whole time? I'm like, because you bought into an illusion. People buy into their own illusions about what life is supposed to demonstrate. And the reality is life demonstrates what it demonstrates. You work with what you have. The more rational and the more real you can be with reality, and the more realistic and the more, I guess you could say associated to reality you are, the healthier you are. The more you grow. Dissociating into a fantasy, expecting fantasy to be real instead of reality, is you perpetuating a hatred towards your psychology, a hatred towards your life, so that you can justify an imagination. And that imagination is what's traumatic. There's nothing on the planet that's traumatic. Those are just experiences. They become traumatic when they get filtered through your value system that says that's right or that's wrong. And that's being filtered by experiences and influence which you don't even know. Could be your parents, could be your friends, could be media, could be anyone with an agenda to fuck up your life. And so you've never questioned that, so therefore you just buy into these beliefs. And then you hold your life accountable to fantasies, and then you're constantly depressed and always wondering, why is life not working out? Why do I keep attracting this circumstance? Well, you're going to keep attracting a shitty circumstance whenever you have a fantastic fantasy. Because reality has to bust your fantasy. And in fact, reality gets worse when you have a fantastic fantasy. Because then reality can never compare. So if reality never compares to the fantasy, what the good is, why would I want to exist? And I'll just share that the number one reason that people attempt suicide, because I've done that, the number one reason they do that is because they have an experience in their life where the fantasy of their imagination of what they think should be is impossible to crack. And so life has no chance. There's no chance that I can get any pleasure out of life. Because my fantasy has all my pleasure. And I cleared that with my client yesterday. It only took us an hour. But that 1 hour has changed this person's life drastically. They realize now that they have been, because of their attachment, and this is the cool piece. This is the cool piece. I know a lot of this is probably cool for most people, but it's a hot ticket item for me. But this is the best part. In her experience, where she's with a guy who's a bit of a rebel, bit of a rough guy, bit of a kind of that attitude, that tattoo, drug attitude, whatever. I'm not saying that's bad, is what it is. Go live your life. But what she was doing was, in her relationship life for like 15 years, she has been seeking out a man who has all the traits that she liked about her traumatizer, but also has all the traits of her fantasy. And so she's always looking for the tattoo guy, and the drug guy, and the party guy, and the guy who can't commit, and the guy who isn't a good father, or the guy who isn't going to show up, or is a player, or doesn't value her, or is just going to drop her as a one-night stand kind of thing. She's literally looking for that while expecting it to be something else. And so yesterday she realized, she's like, I don't need to go for these guys anymore. Why am I even looking for these guys? I said, because you're trying to complete a story. And this is the piece about people which I love so much. Everyone is doing whatever they can to complete their stories. This is the most compassionate thing I could possibly say to anybody. And it's the most heart-opening thing for me because I know it's true. I've seen it again and again and again. People want to complete stories. And they're going to live their life and they're going to do actions to attempt to live out their fantasies and attempt to complete their stories. But completing stories, that can come through associating to your reality and taking actions. That's true. But you cannot complete a story when you are holding the root of that story accountable or in comparison to a fantasy that you've set up that says, this experience shouldn't have been that way. It should have been this way. And because it should have been this way, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I mean, if you're always in debt, you should probably save some money. So, like, whatever. There's actions you can take in that. But it goes to a different level when you're like, my reality is wrong and it shouldn't have happened that way. Because it should have happened this way. And I don't know, like, how many people in this group do therapy, or I don't know how many people in this group are doing counseling or whatever, but I'm going to stand with that according to my understandings and according to my education, my research, and my experience with clients. My experience has shown me that most, I don't know about most, but from what I've seen, my filter says psychology as an applicable science for people to help them resolve things like trauma and traumatic expectations, which is really why it's traumatic, needs a fucking upgrade. Because if I can take this client and after she invests in herself and she downloads what happened, and I get to the root of it, and in an hour we have a life-changing experience which has upgraded her quality of man that she's after, has upgraded herself, has resolved her 15-year anxiety that she's had around men all the time, has grown her up substantially as a communicating human being so that she's not trying to be nice or cute or anything else other to be attractive to a man. She now kind of grabbed her balls, basically. If we can do that in an hour, and she spent 15 years chasing whatever else, well, then my experience is that psychology needs an upgrade. And I'm privileged to be one of the few that wants to upgrade it because I'm willing to demonize it and I'm willing to look at it and be like, no, that's wrong. That's why I've said a lot of the things I've shared in this video. I've said them carefully because I want to make sure people understand my point. So I'm not just getting a person on here who's just going to be like, blah, 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 blah. Look, if you want to do that, fine. You know, you can bitch at me all day. I'll go toe-to-toe with you if I care. Or if you perceive value in that or if you actually want that. But functionally, what I'm trying to express here and what my point of this video is if you have an experience like this, where you have something in your life where you're like, it shouldn't have gone that way, I'm going to challenge you. I just want to challenge you. I want to challenge you in a few things. Number one, ask yourself, what exactly makes that experience traumatic and why? And what I want you to do once you do that is write out exactly why is that traumatic. And I want you to write that out in the form of expectation that you have. So get a piece of paper and be like, it's traumatic because, well, this is what happened. And because this is what happened, this is what I believe. And so it's traumatic because of what I believe. That's the thing I want to get across in this video, is that your trauma is traumatic because of what you believe. Everybody has it worse. There's no one that has it better. And the only difference is what people believe. You can have traumatic beliefs. You can absolutely do that. And in fact, probably the most traumatic beliefs are the most terrific that you have. Because they're compensating. And they're holding you back. And I know it sounds weird. But my client would go through that experience again now because of what she saw she got out of it, because she completed the story. And she's no longer holding out for the fantasies, so she's no longer chasing guys, attempting to be someone else to be loved and appreciated. She's no longer having the anxiety. It's pretty incredible. what you can do by just going back into it and being led down the path to go in and look at the so-called darkness that you've made and have a complete shift in less than an hour. Wouldn't that be worth it? Wouldn't it be worth it to look back on all your, let's just say, sexual experiences and just ask yourself, what is it that I think that experience should have been like? And then just write it down and ask yourself, great, what would have been the downside had it gone that way? Wouldn't that be worth it? Because then you could appreciate your reality just a little bit more. Like I've said, and I'll say again and again and again, the more you associate to your reality, the more you have opportunity to grow. Because you're not growing in a fantasy. Anyway, that's my Sunday sermon as I was cooking breakfast. So now I'm going to go have breakfast. And then I'm going to go work. We'll find something to do. And I hope you can do the same.